Welcome to the Voice of Dynamic Political Centrism, a podcast hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Jonathan Yoni Yaris. Our special guest this week, Senior Democratic Political Strategist, Dan Bryan.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Alan Steinberg, the host of Dynamic Political Centrism podcast. And tonight, in addition to our producer, Dr. Jonathan Yaris, who makes this site what it is, the best audio video you can find in a podcast, we have a star as a guest. And I'll explain why I say that he is a star. The star is Dan Bryan, who is, in my view, the finest election man in the state of New Jersey. And I'll say exactly in a minute what I mean. Years ago, John F. Kennedy had on his staff as his director of legislative affairs a man by the name of Larry O'Brien, and he spelled it differently than Dan Bryan. And they used to ask him, what is his real value to you? And he said, Larry O'Brien is the best election man in the business. I love Larry O'Brien. Another reason I love him is I'm an NBA basketball fan. He was the commissioner for a while, and they had a terrible drug problem in the league, and he solved that problem. But Dan is the best election man in New Jersey, and I'll explain. There's basically three facets to the career of Dan Bryan, or Daniel J. Bryan. See, I know the whole
there you go, yeah.
Okay. Dan Bryan has a threefold plan of assessment whenever he's dealing with elections. Number one, he has experience in the governmental administration area. He was an excellent chief of staff for Don Zimmer in Hoboken, New Jersey. And that's important because it's important for the Democratic Party, because for the Democrats to get their vote up for the coming gubernatorial election in the year 2025, they've got to get a bigger vote in the various communities. I would call Hoboken sort of a blend between urban and suburban. Dan was a great chief of staff. He wasn't a consultant that sat on his rear end and never went out to meet the people, or as we say in Hebrew, he went out to meet the Alpha, and he really did. And so he was in touch with them every day. And Don Zimmer has a reputation of being an excellent mayor and person and good political instincts. And that's all due to Dan Bryan. So that's the first leg of the Dan Bryan triad, was actual government administration experience. But now we'll go to the government communication era, that epic of his life. He was in charge of government communications for Governor Phil Murphy. And people evaluate Murphy different days. I'm more positive on Murphy than I am negative. But the reason he was able to be reelected in 2021, Dan Bryan. Dan was in charge of strategic messaging. And the strategic message is the most important thing. You know, anyone can message about the day-to-day affairs of government. It can be drudgery at some time to watch it. But Dan got beneath the surface. He had an overall message for the Murphy campaign. And that was building a stronger, fair New Jersey. And he really propounded that message. And the election was close. It was closer than I thought. I never thought it would be that close. But I think it was due to Dan. He was careful. He made sure Murphy got everywhere. I don't think Murphy got any sleep for 3 months due to Dan Bryan, because he said, Phil, you're going there today. Too bad, you're going there today. By the time the campaign was over, I think Phil needed a rest of about a month. But it was due to Dan Bryan. He was a great taskmaster, and he gets the message through, and he knows what appeals to the rank and file. There's no elitism in the Dan Bryan message, which is a problem now, and both parties are tending towards elitism. But the third facet is that when he left government, and I guess you've been on the private sector now since 2022?
February 22.
February 22, okay. He ended up going into the private sector and is an excellent ambassador for business people and developers who want to know how to deal with New Jersey government legitimately. You won't get a scandal with Dan Bryan. He'll go to them, he'll tell them how legitimately what their plan of attack should be, and he's very well worth it. And due to the fact that he knows economic development, there's a lot of political consultants who just know, oh, this is a good message, I'm going to get it out. But they don't have any sense as to how it will be received by rank and file voters. That's Dan Bryan's expertise. And the second area is in terms of dealing with government to build a stronger, fair, and more active and vital New Jersey. And Dan, from his government years, from knowing the private sector, he's able to combine the two. So I'll close the Dan Bryan introduction facet with a little word, because I've been celebrating all weekend the New York Mets getting Juan Soto. We're going to the World Series next year, or as Casey Stengel used to call it, the World Series. And, Juan Soto is the greatest star in baseball. Dan Bryan is the star of the political world. So, Dan, you're Juan Soto tonight. It's good to have you here.
I can't live up to that introduction, Alan. I think we just end it right here. You'll appreciate this, by the way. Dawn Zimmer is to this day still the first and only Jewish elected mayor in Hudson County history. Something she wore with a badge of pride.
That is excellent. And, Jen Giento just passed away.
Jen Giento, yeah, awful.
A marvelous lady.
Absolutely.
That's a loss. That really is a bad loss. But Dawn is a person, her name's easy to remember because the Brooklyn Dodgers, my all-time favorite team, had a player, Don Zimmer, who later became Don Zimmer, who used to he later became a Yankee. I think he managed the Yankees for a brief period of time, but he was the bench coach. So the coach of Hoboken is Don Zimmer, and the manager was Dan Bryan. So
there you go.
That's the mnemonic device for me to remember.
Yeah. Anyway, very very kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. Longtime fan of yours. So thanks so much for having me.
I'm delighted. But I'm going to get off the private track just for a minute because I think there's an area where you can really edify the viewers. Something is going on now with the FBI that I find appalling, and that is the forced resignation of Christopher Wray. Now, you managed the communications for transition, and if I get any of this wrong, interrupt me, okay? One of your functions was to really defend any nominee of which there was any question, unless there was no defense, in which case the person was gone. But I don't think you really had any scandals at all during the transition 2021-22. You were able to set forth the record. The nominees basically sailed through, and that was a tribute to your excellent communication strategy and modus operandi. So, Mark, but what do you think? I have to ask you this. I served in the Bush administration as regional administrator of Region 2 EPA. That was considered a sub-cabinet position. Because of that, I had to go through background checks. I didn't have any problem with anything, but my neighbors wondered, what the hell are they asking us all these questions about Steinberg for? I got asked more questions, and the person who did the background check came to my office at the time, and it was just ridiculous. This person came to my office, asked the most irrelevant questions. I got through. I didn't have any problems. But later on, I said, I'm glad, because if there was something that was in my record that I didn't think was a problem, but maybe they thought it was, I'd be ready to defend it. These people are real bad folks, a lot of them. I mean, Matt Gaetz, I wouldn't appoint him to be the garbage collector of Podunk, New York. And you have in Robert Kennedy Jr. a threat to the public health of the United States. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who's a complete ignoramus. You also have Pete Hesketh, who is a misogynist, who is absolutely unfit to be and he's an alcoholic along with that, absolutely unfit to be the defense secretary. So every day the Trump transition, as you will, is beset with defending all these folks. Number one, how do you feel about avoiding background checks? I can't believe that if Dan Bryan had a nominee in front of him who needed a state police check, you wouldn't have told him to get the hell over there and get it done. And number two, what do you think about the transition, the strategy or non-strategy that the Trump transition seems to be employing? Now I'll shut up. It's up to you.
Yeah, listen, the laws of gravity tend not to apply to Donald Trump. The laws of political gravity, they apply to all of us equally. Unfortunately, with Donald Trump, it seems like he just does and says whatever he wants, gets away with murder, and he's got some sort of a special touch and hold over a segment of the American population. And, I think appointing people like Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth and any other administration would be fatal. And somehow he just kind of keeps plodding along. So, listen, I'm not sure the success of the transition was solely due to me. Hopefully, I had a hand in it. I think not appointing people like Matt Gaetz and RFK Jr. was a big piece of it. So that's really the governor right there, picking all the right people. We had fantastic people to celebrate and to roll out and introduce to the public. It was majority female cabinet, majority minority cabinet. So it was a cabinet that reflected the state and really good, qualified people, most importantly, right? First and foremost, good, qualified, smart people. Listen, how that applies to the Trump administration, it just doesn't. It's frustrating to me and everyone else that cares about politics, cares about this country, how much he has seemingly gotten away with. And continues to get away with. Now, I will say, when he first rolled out those nominations, there was kind of a sense of, well, it's the Trump administration. He can do whatever he wants. Well, that wasn't the case. He didn't get Matt Gaetz. I think that at best, Pete Hegseth is on the ropes. And I would say the same thing about RFK Jr. He still has to count to 50 in order to get his cabinet confirmed. So he still has a ways to go. Now, you could argue it makes people like Tulsi Gabbard as DNI seem a bit more normal once you roll out, people that are crazier and crazier. So it doesn't mean he's not going to have a dangerous cabinet. I think he's going to have a dangerous administration, but laws of gravity just seem not to apply to this guy. My point, Alan, that I've made a number of times, and I know that we've interacted on it, is I'm more concerned about what's to come electorally for Democrats. Donald Trump is in the rearview mirror in terms of, yes, he's going to be the president for the next 4 years, but he's never running again. So I think Democrats do have a lot of problems. I It bothers me that Donald Trump has won two national elections. I'd rather focus less on that and more on how to win the next election.
Well, I agree with you, and that has to be done. But at the same time, and you are a defender of democracy, as has Phil Murphy been. He's been very adept at that. I give him a lot of credit for that. But our democracy really is in danger now, and I'll give the best example of it. And that is what's going on with the FBI. Now, Yoni, why don't you put up the book that I'm recommending to everybody on the FBI? It is a book, thank you, Yoni. It's a book written by Beverly Gage, who is a professor at Yale. And I am just a ridiculously overactive reader. There it is.
Hmm.
G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover and the Making of the American Century by Beverly Gage, who is a superb professor of history at Yale. I recommend to all my listeners, and they're a growing group, that you go out and get this book. Right now, with what's going on with the FBI, this book is very, very relevant. But let me tell you a little bit about what this book said about J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover had some really bad aspects. He was a racist. And number two, he was something of a hypocrite. For example, he did a lot of negative things to the homosexual community, which were awful. And he really could ruin people's lives by that. At the same time, he himself had a homosexual relationship with Clyde Tolson of the FBI for many years. So that was hypocrisy. And the voters, I think, can abide. There's homosexuality now is an accepted lifestyle. Homosexuals are to be defended, their privacy, and when they go for jobs and all the rest. And Hoover didn't honor that. But having said that, he basically kept the FBI away from two things. Number one, he kept the FBI away from interfering in retribution on the part of any president. If Trump had been, if J. Edgar Hoover, 100 and some years old, was still alive, and Donald Trump asked him to go after certain people as retribution for what they had said or done to Trump, J. Edgar Hoover would have told him to go to hell, and he would have survived it. The other thing about him is the FBI is a really professional organization. I've worked with the FBI, particularly when I was in the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps, and they are a great organization. Now, today, Christopher Wray, knowing that Donald Trump was going to fire him, step down. I think that was a bad mistake. I think Wray is a great leader of the FBI. I think he is admired by the professionals there. I think they are now scared to death of what Trump may do to try to turn the FBI into his own private little Gestapo that just goes after people. I think they're terrified of that. And the fact that Wray, who is so respected and loved and admired by FBI agents and is leaving, I think it affects the morale, even something that is not as sensitive, such as the agencies where you were finding new cabinet members and all the rest. You know how it can affect the morale of an agency when a leader leaves. I know one thing I respect Murphy for is if there was somebody in, let's say, a sub-cabinet position, because he was smart enough to appoint people who were loyal to him, not for retribution purposes. That's not Phil Murphy's way, but so they would be in accord with policy. Donald Trump doesn't give a hoot about policy. He cares about retribution. I'm doing an article that talks about fascism as not just a governing ideology, but it is a way of gaining power. And that's what Donald Trump is all about. So he would rather have loyalists who were incompetent and who were bigoted and who were vile than he would competent people. So I think that now the FBI morale is going to be terrible. And I would rather Wray had stayed. He would go on as a historical figure. Your thoughts on that, whether you agree or disagree with me?
Yeah, listen, I agree. I think ultimately it's a formality. He would have been fired on day one anyway. So, force Trump to do that, that's fine. As far as I know, Chris Wray's a man of honor and just wanted to avoid that situation for himself. I think he's earned that. Listen, we've got a lot of dark days ahead in the next 4 years. There's no doubt about that. I think we're really going to
Yes, we
test
do.
how strong this system is or how weak this system is. You got to give Donald Trump credit for this. He didn't hide any of this. He told the American people exactly what he wanted to do. It was dark, it was scary, it was irresponsible and dangerous, and they elected him. So
That is so
there's some dark
true.
days ahead.
There are dark days ahead. And, I love America. I served in the armed forces. It has been my privilege to be in a political system at a rather high level all these years. I love the freedom of speech that I have to give my views and to play a part in the public sector debate. But with Donald Trump energizing the FBI with Kash Patel to be his private secret terror force, that's bad news. And we are having problems in that regard. And that affects the world where you've been primarily involved. I put together I have to thank Yoni. He did this. I had this as a last minute idea, but he put it together. And that is a series of videotapes I have that show the evolution of politics and political communication, which you have been involved in so many years. Political communications in the 1930s with FDR, it was all happy days are here again. Why don't you put that up now, Yoni?
All
This
right.
was the way communications and commercials were in the 1930s. He's about to put it up.
All right.
Oh, great. Go ahead. FDR. Here it goes from the happy days are here again. Dan, you never had the opportunity to make a song like this.
No, would have been fun.
It would have been fun, a lot more fun than it is today, where we're living with dystopia. Is it coming on?
The days are here
again.
Here again. Let us sing a song of here again. Happy days are here again. Oh, yes.
Is it going or did it shut off?
I think it shut off.
Okay, that's all right. We got a flavor of that. But if Dan Yaries had been a consultant in the 1930s, he would have had a much bigger, they didn't even have consultants then. But politics was a much less complicated game. But that was a good feature. Both parties tried to give hope. And if a government can't give hope, a government is failing because that's what people look for government, not only for policy, but also for hope. But now that's the Democrat high-minded message. Let's go to 1984. I was a Republican then before the advent of Donald Trump. And I was campaigning for Ronald Reagan. I'm just finishing a book about his foreign policy, which was very successful. And Reagan was the opposite of Trump. Believe me, when he's compared with Trump, I want to get sick. But anyway, this commercial is, again, a positive theme. Morning in America. That was the whole idea, that we were going to go into a hopeful era, that we had come out of the inflation of the not first 1980s or 1970s. So here it is, Morning in America with Ronald Reagan. Go ahead.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Dan, that was a great commercial, by the way. The whole theme of Morning in America really energized people. And actually, I saw you make great commercials like this when you were running Governor Murphy's PAC. You made very good positive ads, and they weren't silly.
Well, what we did with the Stronger, Fairer Forward you mentioned, when I left the governor's office in 2022, we did make some media for the governor just to kind of remind people who he is, what he did, things like that. And the best thing you can do with political communication is be authentic to the person you're talking about. And with talking to him, I said, when I first joined the campaign in 2016, 2017, he would send us articles. David Leonhardt from the New York Times was on this kick about how, for the first time in American history, this generation isn't going to do better than their parents, right? People are going to have less economic opportunity than their parents did in the previous generation, and how devastating that is to the whole idea of America. And it really resonated for Phil, who came from very, very modest means in the Boston area, and grew up working poor, as he said. But depending on what day it was, you could just say outright poor, and then made himself obviously into the success that he is today. The fact that that path is not as wide or as open as it was for his generation was something that was very animating to him. So I said, why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about the American dream. Let's talk about what it means to you, what it means to your administration, and how people can achieve that and what you're investing in. So we kept it optimistic. We kept it kind of true to that core thing that he believed in. And I think it comes across in the way that he speaks, but that's a truth kind of across the board, Alan, for you can't go up to a candidate and just give them a message that you want them to say. You really have to find out what's authentic to them, what they care about, because it's going to come across totally differently.
Well, those ads that you did with Phil comes from a great tradition, by the way. He was not, I don't think he was involved, except for maybe volunteering for some campaigns in his youth, but he lived the Boston Irish tradition. The Boston Irish political community, I'm saying something very positive about an ethnic group, is one of the great stories of ethnic politics in America. That was the community that spawned JFK and his grandfather, Honey Fitz, John Fitzgerald, the mayor of Boston. They had a great tradition. And when I would hear Phil talk, very early on, I said, he's good at this. Here he had been at Goldman Sachs. And if he had come over as a Goldman Sachs guy, people would have snored. Okay. Instead, he came over as a Boston Irish. I use that term very positively. He came over in the Boston Irish tradition that you would get from the Kennedys, and later on from Ted Kennedy, who was one of the greatest senators in the history of this country. And he exemplified that tradition. And you put it into words for him. And the only person in New Jersey that ever had I shouldn't say better positive ads, but a similar positive ads was Tom Kean when he was running for re-election in 1985.
It's funny, Alan, you bring up Tom Kean, because as we're looking at the governor's 8th year in office, he is, depending on the poll you look at, roughly about plus 20 with voters in the state. That's how they view him going to his last year in office. The last time any governor was that successful was Tom Kean in 1989. So it's been a very long time since then where we've had a governor have the ability to win 2 terms, very stubbornly maintain their popularity, even when he had that close election win in 2021 because he was kind of fighting against that red tide. He remained popular. So people in New Jersey really have resonated with him, to your point, in the message he's brought.
There you go. And he always had that sense of joie de vivre, which I think was something Tom Kean had too. And very, very successful. You know, you guys did a job on message that I think was historic. I'm not exaggerating by that.
I just want
But
to
then you end up going into, what'd you say, Yoni?
I just want to interject real fast. And the other difference that came in is his ambassadorship to Germany was huge. Because he went from Goldman Sachs to Germany, and what he posted very openly about his experiences there, it made him relatable.
Yep.
Yeah, he did. He had to relate to staff. And so he was ready. You know, a lot of people said, oh, this guy's from Goldman Sachs. He surprised everybody. You know, he was good in debate. And he will be leaving with a good legacy. And I have another view, and this is a positive, not a negative. So I don't want it to be taken as a negative. He also, I think, politically did a very smart thing when it came to things like the anchor program, rebates. I think that the rebates did this. Some people said, well, you shouldn't give rebates, just give the money to the local Board of Education and let them spend it as you wish. You know they're going to spend the whole damn thing, and they're not going to lower property taxes. And by forcing certain standards and caps, he forced them to keep he forced them to keep local spending within reasonable bounds. No governor ever gets a good review on property taxes. I've noticed that in polls. I've yet to see a governor, even Kean, who, although one time property taxes weren't such a problem then, but every governor gets it on that issue. But Murphy was not hurt by that because the voter could see that he was sending money back. His name was on the check. Everyone saw that it was Phil Murphy. I'll tell you who won an election due to that was Brendan Byrne in 1977. He sent out the rebate checks. It looked like everyone thought he was going to lose to Ray Bateman. The checks were only $200. The check I got from Murphy was $750 for living in the apartment. So I sent a prayer for him that day when I got that check in the mail.
Yeah, listen, I think, Alan, that's a piece of it. I think another piece of it is this, it's one thing to pay your taxes. It's another thing to not have any idea where your taxes are going, what you're getting from them. So what Chris Christie did, I'm very partisan here. I'll be
Well, that's okay. He's not a great friend of mine.
Well, okay. Well, Chris Christie did was he slashed investment in education, in the pension, in NJ Transit, and all over the place. But your taxes basically remained the same and kept going up. So now you're saying, well, now I'm paying these taxes and I'm getting nothing for it. So there was a deep level of frustration with Governor Christie over a variety of issues, but that was one of them. What Governor Murphy said was, listen, I'm not jacking the beanstalks with the magic beans. I'm not going to sell you magic beans and tell you I'm going to cut your property taxes in half or something like that. But what I am going to tell you is this. We're going to invest in education, invest in a pension, make our full pension payment, invest in NJ Transit, invest in free community college, all these different things. And you're going to have a government that's working for you, right? And it's responsive
100%.
to you. And you're going to feel like you're getting something for those tax dollars. So is that as good as dropping property taxes in half? Maybe not, but it's the next best thing.
No, I think it's better. Because there's a certain amount, the public doesn't realize this, and I consider myself the average public-spirited citizen. They want all the services, and they'll understand if there's a limit, but they would not like it if services got denuded. I'll tell you one thing Christie did that I thought was very wrong, and I often disagree with the NJEA. I do think the NJEA, though, has, by bargaining for higher salaries, I think they've done a terrific thing because they've made education in New Jersey a profession, not just a trade.
Right.
And it's a profession that deserves respect. And Christie used to talk to teachers in a very degrading way. You know, he had a town meeting once where and I was shocked because my mother was a teacher. And my mother was a lot more liberal than I am, but my mother was a teacher. I was so proud of that. And he goes into this rally and he said, this woman says, look, I want to be respected for the work I do and for the education I put into becoming a teacher and getting a teacher certificate. And Christie said to her, well, you don't have to do it. I mean, give me a break, you know? And Murphy has brought back respect for teachers, and he brings forward I don't feel Phil Murphy's perfect, but he's done a damn good job in a lot of areas, and education is one. He will leave with a good governing legacy.
Well, I just took a shot at Chris Christie, but now I'll give him a benefit for a line he used to use that I like, which is if you want to find someone you agree with 100% of the time, go look in the mirror. So listen, no governor, no elected official is going to be perfect. I think within those boundaries, I think Phil is going to be able to, Governor Murphy is going to be able to walk out of office January 2025 with his head held high as one of the most effective governors in modern New Jersey history.
I couldn't agree more. Do you have any idea but then I'm going to get on to something else, but I'm getting some good scoops from you tonight. Do you have any idea what he may be doing after he leaves? You don't have to reveal any state secrets.
If I had a state secret, I'd tell you, and I'd tell you that I can't tell you what I know.
Well, when you have it, you got to come back to the show. We want to break the story.
Yeah, there you go. No, listen, the reality is this. I don't know for a very specific reason. A lot of times people are so used to cynicism in politics that we used to tell people all the time in 2020, and everyone said, oh, Governor he's got to run for president, got to run for president. We used to say he really does want to focus on being governor. And no one believed it until time went on. They figured, all right, I guess he was real about that. And we're telling people now he really is focused on his last year in office. He wants to run through the tape. I was just he was texting with a few of us a few nights ago about how he really wants to remain on the offensive and continue to roll things out and continue to be effective all through his 8 years. And I think what comes next is what comes next. But he's really focused on his 8th year in office, which I give him a lot of credit for. I think a lot of politicians in his place would be kind of looking around, figure out what's going next, foot out the door. He's not doing that. He is fully focused. He is fully engaged. He wants to have a full speed, rip roaring 8th year in office and finish strong, run through the tape. So I don't know what's coming next. I bet you if you gave him truth serum, he would tell you he doesn't know what's coming next. He really wants to finish this job as governor.
But I know that, but I also think that his enthusiasm for politics has increased. He seems to like campaigning.
Oh yeah, no, he's always been a campaigner. He likes people. You have to like people like campaigning.
He does, exactly.
He really does like people.
And he has been a good president. I would be a governor. That was not Freudian.
Yeah.
He has been a good governor on the environment also. I've written articles about environmental justice and the emphasis he put on that. So he'll be missed, but we'll get to the next election in a few minutes. Now, I want to get to a transition now. The Dan Bryan era, positive commercials. You can hit him back with a punch. I saw you do it to Chitterelli when he claimed, oh, I never had anything to do with MAGA Stop the Steal. And then one morning I got a call from the campaign office. Here we go. And it had the smoking gun that Jack Chitterelli had been to a Stop the Steal rally. And I had been very friendly with him, but I exploded at that. I don't like being lied to. And that was a flagrant falsehood. But there are 3 things that have happened in the Trump era, and we're going to have a few posted commercials on this. Number one is polarization. It's one thing to have disagreement and diversity, but this polarization is hate-filled, and it basically is energized by white grievance, which is ripping the country apart. The next thing is a lack of hope, sort of a dystopian vision, that we're in the era of carnage and as such, government carnage, and there's no hope, and you need a strong man like me, otherwise you can't do anything on your own. And finally, there is the condemnation of violence. Now, I'm going to get to the condemnation of violence in the context in a few minutes, but Yoni, why don't you run the commercial of Donald Trump encouraging violence at that rally?
Sure, coming right up.
Here we go.
Demute.
Bye-bye. Look, see, he's smiling. See, he's having a good time. I love the old days, You know what I hate? There's a guy totally disruptive, throwing punches. We're not allowed to punch back anymore. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks.
There it is, the glorification of violence. Thank you, Yoni. There you see the whole thing. But the next matter is when he multiplies it into this vision of American carnage. Do we have that, Yoni? Did we get that in?
Give me a moment. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'll get it up for you.
Okay, good. Here comes American carnage. Just unbelievable. This is dystopia multiplied by a factor of 100.
Give me a little bit longer moment than that. Give me about
You
30
can have
seconds.
it.
I needed that for a little bit.
Our moments are open to you.
It is really dispiriting, Alan, and we're
It
in
is.
such an odd,
You know.
we're in an odd place in time where, all these things that he said and did. I don't know that he was rewarded for them because I don't think that's what people like about him. I think it's what people say they specifically dislike about him. But he had the ability to tell people, acknowledge their pain, and say, if it feels like you're getting screwed, you're right, you are, and here's the reason. And the Biden-Harris campaign didn't do that. They just kind of tell me, I know you feel like things aren't bad, but trust me, things aren't good, but trust me, they're good. Telling people their feelings were
You
wrong.
can't do that. You can't make
Can't do it.
people feel contrary to their feelings.
Nope.
But
And they paid him. They
Yoni,
paid
how are
very
we
deep
doing? Is
price.
that going to come up? I think he's having a difficult time.
Oh,
with
I
that.
got it. It'll be up in 10 seconds.
10 seconds is fine.
All right.
But what you're saying, Dan, is it is dispiriting. This year I went to a lot of Met games just to get my mind off politics.
It was the year to go.
It was a year to go, and I just got a call. The Mets have account executives, just like Goldman Sachs. They have account executives to call their best customers. I got a guy that calls me from the Mets, and I got into a deal for $540 where I'm getting 20 tickets and become a Met member, so I can get discounts on my kosher food, and I will have 27 games. I have two forms of entertainment in New York that I love. One is the Metropolitan Opera, so there's that Met, and the other is the New York Mets. So I'm good to go.
I don't know anything about the first Met, but the second Mets I know a whole lot about. No, I'm just as excited as you are. It's going to be a fun
Good.
season.
We'll have to take in a game. You'll have to
I
put
will
up
love
with me
it.
for a whole game.
Twist my arm.
Yoni, how we doing? I gave this to Yoni as a last minute thing, so I don't know if he's going to be able to. Yoni, if you can't, don't worry about it.
It's coming. I
It's
just had to get the
coming?
right link working.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. He'll have that up in a minute, but I'll give just a brief thing. The idea of American carnage is the most negative and cynical thing that Trump's done. I don't think you're going to be able to get it, so don't worry
No,
about
I got it. It's here.
All right, so let's put it up.
I just didn't want to interrupt you while you were talking.
No, you can always, it wasn't like I was the Oracle of Delphi there.
All right, here we go.
Oh, here it is.
The center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Americans want great schools for their children, safe neighborhoods for their families, and good jobs for themselves. These are just and reasonable demands of righteous people and a righteous public. But for too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities, rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation, an education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime and the gangs and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
There you go.
Show your.
There you go. Thanks, Yoni. You have these three trends in messaging. Now, this is the era where Bryan really emerges because now you have a great deal of clients in the private sector. How do you deal with this? I know it's an open-ended question, but here you are trying to put out a positive message. Although you're going to defend any candidate you work for, I feel sorry for them if they try to hit below the belt because you will kick them where the sun never shines. But how do you deal with such negativity out there without the message getting lost?
Yeah, I mean, listen, my theory of the case is this. That's not the stuff people like about Donald Trump. It's the stuff they hate about him. What they like about him is, just take a step back there. People today, young families trying to start a life, housing is almost completely unaffordable. People are getting priced out of the housing market. So that American dream of owning a home, people are just giving up on it. Health insurance is wildly expensive. Daycare is unbelievably expensive. I mean, we had a period, my wife and I, we had two kids in daycare. We were paying more for daycare than we were for our mortgage. Senior care. I mean, just go up and down the list. Groceries through it is people, middle class families feel like they're getting screwed from every angle, right? And if you're not acknowledging that and saying, if it feels like you're getting screwed, guess what you are? And here's why. Now, here's why two people have done that really well in the last decade. One was Donald Trump, and the other is Bernie Sanders. Both had incredible success. Bernie Sanders never actually won the nomination, but came much further than anyone thought that he would, right?
Yes, he did.
Now, they have different reasons for here's who's screwing you. But that acknowledgement, almost the Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, right? Of I know how you're feeling. I'm not going to sit here trying to tell you that it's different. And I know you don't feel like the economy is good, but it is good. And let me tell you why. I'm going to tell you, listen, all the macroeconomics could say they're good. The economists could say things are good. Wall Street could say things are good. I know it's not good because your household finances aren't working. And it's never been more expensive to be a middle class family in this country. Not only can't you get by on one job, you can't get by on two jobs anymore. So I think Donald Trump does a good job of that and presents himself not as someone who is defending the system, but attacking the system on behalf of the American people. It drives me all crazy because I think it's all,
It's
fake
false
and
empathy,
phony
is what
and
it is.
false, but he's good at it. He's
Well,
good
I
at it.
agree, but
I
now we're
think the negativity, Alan, is what people hate about him. And I think that's one of the reasons he's so unpopular. Even today, he's unpopular.
I agree 100%, but that gives us a perfect transition to the last commercial we're going to run because he combines that. He caters to that anger, but he combines that with a cultural divide that marks the worst polarization I've ever seen. And I am a historian, and I can say that with some authenticity. But Yoni, run this last commercial because I think this last commercial is what won him the election. I may be overstating that, but let's go ahead. This commercial is frightening. Go ahead, Yoni.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery for prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
There you go. Okay. That commercial was false as to the facts, but it was very demagogically effective. I think that commercial may have won the election because it was so close. That commercial was shown every Sunday on the NFL. Now, I'm an NFL freak. I had to sit through a number of those. And I wasn't sure what effectiveness it was having. Now I know it had a massive effect because if you look, NFL is number one with more men are into the NFL than women. And it's a habit for millions of men watching the NFL every week. And they watched this and they believed it. And that commercial had all the trends in one. It had the whole polarization down pat. It had down pat the dystopian vision. And it also incorporates, in a sense, the toleration of violence against people. So I think that commercial was definitive. You're the expert on communications. What did you think of its effect?
Listen, I'm not an expert on national politics. I do
No, but
listen
you
to
know
people that
communications.
I do listen to people that are smarter than I am. And there are people that actually say a bit differently than you, Alan, that ad wasn't as effective as they would have liked it, and they actually brought down some of the airtime towards the end of the campaign. And listen,
That's
it
interesting.
really was, you and I and people see it as that ad is anti, LGBT, anti-transgender, stirring hate. I think what they were, obviously all of that is true, I would say. I think what they were really trying to do is Kamala Harris is all so deep in the Democratic Party and their political correctness and speaking to the niche of the population that she's so lost. She's never going to speak to you. She's never going to work for you. She's never going to speak to you because she is so lost trying to impress everyone over here. I'm for you. She's for them. I'm for you. It almost didn't matter who the them was. They happened to pick transgender folks, which I think was a shame. And I think it's, again, hateful and all of that and terrible. I think what they were just trying to show was she's for them, I'm for you. And I think it was aimed specifically at black men. There's some numbers to show that they didn't do as well among black men as
I
they
was
would have
happy
liked.
to see they didn't do as
Yeah.
well among black
So,
men.
I mean,
That was the
clearly,
one
given the
area that
voices in that ad, it was aimed at black men. So, listen, whether or not that was or wasn't effective, I can't tell you, but I will tell you that I think you're right in that it's divisive, it's polarization, it's hateful, it's Donald Trump's hitting new lows in American politics every day. And unfortunately, he was rewarded for it, or at the very least, not punished for it.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope that they discovered in their research that it wasn't as effective. I'm just afraid if it wasn't effective, I'm relieved. But even if it wasn't so effective, the fact that he felt no, it doesn't take a lot to compel Trump to spew hatred. But the fact that they felt that the trend was strong enough out there that that's what they should cater to, that disturbs me a great deal.
Yeah.
That tells you that there's a lot of an undercurrent in American life today that really caters to have a lot of bottom feeders that are feeding off that, and that's really scary to me.
I couldn't agree more.
Let me ask you a couple things. I want to have you back again to just talk about the gubernatorial race coming up. What we did today is we covered the political landscape. And another session, it's a credit for us to get you on. We'll talk about the campaign itself and what trends you think may be running with the Democrats, one trends you think may be running with the Republicans. But I have a couple preparatory questions on that. It has to do with campaign techniques. I've come to question, I believe every candidate should have a good GOTV effort. But I was told incorrectly before the election what a great GOTV effort was being made in Pennsylvania, that Trump didn't have one and Pennsylvania was going to be in the bag. And it ended up very badly over there. And the other thing is, I've also read that GOTV get out the vote efforts can be effective on the margins. It's not so clear how much of that can affect an election. Although I do know this, back in my Republican days, in 1997, Christie Whitman was running for re-election against Jim McGreevey, and McGreevey was I say this positively, he was a great street politician. He always had a sense of the streets. And he said later to me and others that he felt that what won it for Christie Whitman was a great GOTV effort that Chuck Itain, who was just passed away, was the state chair then, had put up. And, the margin was less than 1%. And then McGreevey later was elected governor in 2001. But I'm wondering, what is your view of GOTV and what is the best kind of GOTV?
Yeah, listen, things are changing, obviously, election to election, cycle to cycle. GOTV is important, but it's a little, Alan, like, if you're getting ready for the Super Bowl, you'd certainly like to have a really good special teams, right? A really good
Right.
kicker, really good punter. I think you would say you'd much rather go into that game with that, but I don't think special teams is going to win you the game, right? I think GOTV is like that. There is no reason not to do it. You should do it. It's important. I, from what people tell me who are experts in the field, it's a matter of points, right? It's not like you can take a candidate who's losing by 15 points, have a really good field program, and have them win. But if it's a tight race, what you can do is make sure you juice up that turnout, ensure people know that there is an election now in a time without the monoculture, right? Without strong news programs, without New Jersey doesn't even have a statewide newspaper anymore. There are far less educated voters than there used to be, even in terms of there is an election coming up, right? There is a primary coming up. So field programs is important for informational as well as persuasive. So it's two different things. One is you're going to strong Democratic, if you're a Democratic GOTV, strong Democratic households and saying, hey, just want to make sure you know there's a primary coming up, there's a general election coming up. Want to make sure you're able to vote, and here's where you're voting, all that kind of stuff. And then the other is persuasion. I'm going to go to your door and say, hey, don't vote for Allen, vote for Yoni, right? So how effective that is, it's probably a matter of points. You'd certainly rather do it than not. If you can do it with volunteer energy, even all the better if you're not spending money on it. So I still think you're going to see people investing in it and doing it. I still think it's important. But it's not going to single-handedly win you a campaign.
Well, I love the football analogy you made, but what about this? What about a different form of GOTV that works either off emails to people or off social media? I don't know enough to make a judgment as to how effective that is, but it would strike me it would save a lot of expense.
Yeah, the answer is and both. You do everything. So you email, you text, you call, you knock on doors, you send mailers. You do all of those things because again, there are people that get their news through podcasts and don't read the paper anymore. There are still people that read the paper, don't listen to podcasts, don't watch TV, all of that. We're all kind of segregated in how we take our information in these days. By the way, the vast majority of people now get their news from social media, as scary as that is.
It is
So
scary.
yeah, it is scary. So it's all of the above. If you really want to run a comprehensive campaign, you're knocking on doors, you're sending mailers, you're boosting digital ads into social media feeds, you're on TV, you're on YouTube, you're doing all of these things.
I will close what has been a very good show. I can't thank you enough for going on, and we're going to nudge you to come back, okay?
Sure.
But here is the final thing that I think typifies the mood of America in a frightening way. The murder of Bryan Thompson by Luigi Mangione. What terrifies me is not just the act, but there's such anger out there that millions of Americans are making a hero out of this guy. Like it's some kind of social good if you're upset with healthcare in this country to murder the CEO. And I am just appalled by this, but I'm afraid that there's going to be a copycat of this in the political world, that people may, heaven forbid, try acts of violence against political leaders. But not only that, they will go out there and justify that. So you guys have a tough task. I mean, you in the political communications industry. The fact that they could be sending him money for his legal bills, I have a 2-word Yiddish phrase for that. Oy vey, that's the worst.
It's tough. Listen, violence is never the answer. Murdering the CEO of a healthcare company isn't going to solve anyone's problems. It's only going to make everyone's problems worse. So start there. That's the most important. And we can never glorify anything like this, any type of act like that. But you would be blind to ignore the groundswell, as you're saying, Alan. I would check an internet forum kind of that was talking about it, the New York City, the subreddit afterwards, and I can't tell you how many people said, tear down the wanted posters. Finally, someone's doing something like this. Can't ignore it. And it's a part of people are hurting. They are hurting, I think, far more than people in DC realize. People are desperately struggling, not to, I want to live and I want to drive a Rolls Royce, I want to buy a second home, all these things just to get by, to send their kid to school, to pay for, maybe I did everything right in life, right? Everything right in life. Then I got cancer and it bankrupted me. And I've got to sell my home and I can't send my kid to that school anymore. I can't send him to that kid anymore. How is that fair? So you really can't listen. Nothing condones violence and murder and things like that. So put that aside. As far as the reaction, you can't blame people for feeling incredibly frustrated and angry given the state of how we treat middle class families in this country today. The fact that we just expect them to keep paying exorbitant fees for their health care, get denied coverage, go broke because they get sick. That's just one thing. We talked about housing before. We talked about education before. We talked about childcare. We talked about senior care. I mean, if you're a young family today, my wife and I say this all the time. We bought our home 6 years ago. I'm not sure we'd be able to afford it today, let alone, 10, 20
Oh, I
years
hear
down the
you.
road. It really is, people are hitting a breaking point. I was surprised to see the reaction, but I think rather than we can condemn the act. We shouldn't condemn the reaction. We should listen to people. Listen to them. Why are people reacting this way? And let's try to speak to their concerns and speak to the fact that people just don't feel like they can get by in America today.
That leads me to a conclusion. And I have a feeling that you and myself and Yoni probably share this consensus that an election, and this is a perfect transition to the conclusion of this show and laying the foundation for the next one. I think whichever party, because the Republicans have managed to reduce the registration gap between the Democrats and Republicans in New Jersey. It's still a wide Democrat lead, but it's not foolproof. The election coming up this fall is not a guarantee. But I think whichever party is able to persuade the voters that they really care about that they're really empathetic to what is going on, that when they hear a person who is making $40,000 a year, which used to be a good middle-class standard, they can't even put food on their table. When people are hearing these things, if the Democrats got into a situation in the last election, it may not have been fair, but they were looked upon as elitist, particularly when you had all these celebrities coming on TV shows.
Yeah.
That was a bad move.
As tone deaf as you get.
That was totally, that's the word, tone deaf. I think whichever party persuades the voters in New Jersey that they are tone sensitive, that they hear them, that even if they don't have perfect answers, they will work for perfection and they will work for answers and they really give a damn. I think that's the party that's going to win. And that's why I will not make, I understand a lot about politics, but what I ran into with Donald Trump is I predicted everything that he was going to do, but I was absolutely wrong as to the reaction that he got in the public. It still blows my mind, but that's the state of our affairs. But we will be watching which party comes up with a candidate that is empathetic, and you'll be able to give us guidance and in terms of what candidates may have done right, what candidates may have done wrong. I'm sure that all the Democrat candidates will want to hire you in some way, shape, or form. So if you are, I will not force you to come on the show and say anything negative about the candidate, but I would want you to come on very seriously in terms, you wouldn't be able to trash your candidate, but you would be able to talk in general about what tactics work, because to close this off, some candidates are masters of strategy, the consultants are masters of strategy. Dan Bryan, geez, boy, I'll tell you something, that wasn't Freudian about you and Larry O'Brien, although that would be good to be compared with Larry O'Brien. Dan Bryan is not just a master of strategy. He also, unlike many consultants, is a master of tactics. And that's what he brings to the table. And that's why we are so fortunate on this podcast to have his presence. Dan, terrific. Thank you so much for coming on. And we look forward to having you again. And I also look forward, you're going to have to go with me to a Mets game and sit there while I scream. But I get the other fans to scream too.
Yeah. No, I'm more excited about the Mets in 25 than anything else. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Yoni, thank you so much as well.
Terrific. Thanks a lot. And that brings to a close this edition of Dynamic Political Centrism, where our goal is to forge solutions out of centrism by forging an atmosphere of common sense, common ground, and compromise. All the best to your listeners out there, and we'll have a few more shows before the end of 2024. Looking forward to 2025. Thank you very much. Have a good week.
Thanks, guys.
Join us next time for a very special guest. You won't want to miss it.